Thank you, Brother Salah. So next, it is my honor to present to you the Azad Asset Management. So first, it will be Bashar Qasem, who is the president and the CEO of Azad Asset Management and one of the earliest leaders in Islamic socially responsible investing in the United States. So please welcome to the stage Bashar Qasem.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Today we are discussing something that is both legal obligation and spiritual trust, fiduciary duty. In Islam, managing charitable wealth is an amanah from Allah Azza wa Jal, and how we fulfill that trust determines the future of our institutions and the impact we leave behind. Being a fiduciary is more than approving budgets, signing checks. It requires prudence, loyalty, and accountability, making informed decisions, putting the mission above personal interest, and ensuring transparency at every step in the way. These are not just rules. They are safeguards that help us preserve our mission for the generations to come. Managing endowment and non-profit funds is not simply administrative work. It is an act of worship when done with integrity and excellence. To guide us through these principles, we are honored to have Sister Fatima Iqbal. She is a certified financial planner, and she is Azad senior financial advisor, that she will share with you some of these safeguards, how you can meet the fiduciary duty when you run these endowments and funds for these public charity. Fatima.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So as Bashar mentioned, today, alhamdulillah, all of us have gathered here together, and alhamdulillah, we have a lot of leaders from our community. And I think we all bring with us a sense of amanah, a trust in caring for our institutions. But today I want to talk a little bit beyond that and talk more than just best faith efforts, and really discuss some of the legal and regulatory responsibilities that many of us may have either as trustees or directors of our various organizations. So as Bashar mentioned, within this role, there are, I would say, three main factors that we need to be cognizant of. One, of course, is prudence, which means that we need to make sure that we are making informed, careful decisions. This is, again, a responsibility that often might require a deeper understanding when it comes to investments and also their potential impact when it comes to financial decisions of the organizations. Loyalty, right? It's again about putting the organization above ourselves, above our own self-interest, about our own preferences, and really understanding also that the decisions that we make within an organization can also carry personal liabilities as well. And finally, accountability. So when it comes to ensuring transparency and compliance, we make sure that we have administrative procedures that are properly documented. So when it comes to legal and regulatory oversight, there's some that I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. Of course, there's the IRS reporting. As nonprofit organizations, you file what's called a Form 990 every year. This lists the annual income, assets, expenditures, if there's any donor restrictions. All of this is laid out on the 990. Now, those of you who are within the nonprofit sector, I would encourage each of you to go and read your 990 if you have not. And if you are donors, I would encourage you to go and look up the 990 for the organizations that you donate to. And you can actually do this. It's on the IRS website if you search under the charity search option. But it's actually very informative, and it's also a great way to understand, again, what's going on underneath the organization as well. Now, there's also state compliance. This is usually done by the state attorney general, where they enforce charitable trust laws. They can compel organizational compliance, and they can also hold boards personally liable. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about certain acts now which also organizations should be aware of. One of them being the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, often known as UPNIFA based on the acronym. Now, this is an act that was actually adopted by 49 states, including DC. And this actually provides guidelines for management, investment, and expenditures of endowment funds. So aligning your policies, your documents, your process isn't really optional. It becomes essential to making sure that it complies with UPNIFA. And part of this includes various different tests, and I'll go over a few of them. For example, there is a test for prudence for spending. There's another test for investments. So it's important to understand, again, that the regulatory environment includes all this, and it's something we should actually be excited about, because in many ways, this is something that actually can help our organizations thrive. And in addition to UPNIFA, there's also the Uniform Prudent Investor Act, which is another act which complements the UPNIFA by, again, emphasizing policy diversification, delegation, due diligence in selecting advisors, and again, monitoring the performance. So talking next a little bit about spending policies, I know some of the other speakers touched a little bit about this when it comes to endowments and especially waqf. With waqf now, we are talking about the containment of principal and only spending from the income. But when we talk about spending policies, again, endowments need to have a way where they can have sustainable strategies. Because again, like Brother always said, we're bringing together assets, but the idea is now that they can continue on, that maybe in 10, 15 years, the organization no longer needs to do fundraising because they have an endowment. Maybe they can support the operational costs. So endowments, they need to have these policies in order to smooth out fluctuations. For example, maybe there are periods where there's donor fatigue. There's not a lot of income coming in. So the endowment spending can come into play then to support those projects. It can also help to plan for long-term impact. And when it comes to spending policies, that act that I was telling you about earlier, it actually has 7 different factors that organizations should consider whenever they are defining their spending policy. Well, for example, will spending today harm the fund's ability to serve future generations? Does the spending align with the donor's intent and the organization's mission? What is happening in the economy right now? What are economic factors like growth, recession, inflation? How will the price changes affect the fund's purchasing power? What is the anticipated return on investments over time? Does the organization have other revenue streams if they need? And finally, is spending consistent with the organization's IPS or investment policy statement, which I'll talk about later. But ultimately, what we're asking ourselves is, what happens if we overspend today? How does that affect our ability to be able to serve tomorrow? So investment policy statements. Now, an investment policy statement is simply a blueprint for managing those investments. So you have the endowment, you have the money. Now what? Now you need a vehicle to grow that investment. So the investment policy statement can really help you define, again, how to do that in a prudent manner. So it can define the investment goals, your risk tolerance, your asset allocation. It can assign benchmarks so that you're not just shooting out like, oh, we want a great return. What does that return mean? What is that benchmark that we are evaluating this with? Is the portfolio properly diversified? And do you have different asset classes that will perform differently based on different economic conditions? And this kind of investment policy statement is not just created, but it should be a living, breathing document within your organization. It's not just something you create, make it pretty, put it on the shelf. It should be something that you review regularly, that you have meetings to review, you evaluate, you see whether you need to rebalance your portfolio, whether changes need to be made, whether you have been able to follow the investment policy statement. And as I think Brother Ubaidullah was saying earlier, if you have an investment policy statement, it can also help you avoid some crucial mistakes. And as humans, we have to recognize that sometimes we all have our own likes and dislikes within investments. Maybe somebody comes in, they love alternatives. But again, that investment policy statement can be that way to make sure that we remain prudent. Prudent in making investment decisions. So going back to that act again, UPNIFA doesn't go away. It also gives us 8 factors which we need to consider when investing endowment assets. Those include the general economic conditions. So again, what's happening in the market right now. Again, possible effects of inflation, deflation, tax consequences. Now, of course, nonprofit organizations understand that they may be tax exempt. Private foundations do have excise taxes and other types of investment taxes that they might need to be aware of. What is the role of each investment in the overall portfolio? Like, how does this asset fit into the diversification and risk strategy? What is the expected total return? What are the needs for institutional liquidity, the income, preservation of capital? And are there any special relationships that the asset has to the charitable purpose? For example, if there's a building, right? Is that building have a special meaning for the organization through which, maybe there's rental income, but there's also services provided? How does that tie in to the overall investment strategy? Now, I would say this is where we often see organizations making some critical mistakes. One of them is that, of course, evaluating investments simply based on return and lowest fees. Because as fiduciaries, this is what people seem to think is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to get the best investment for the lowest cost. That is my responsibility as a fiduciary. But again, as we see, again, with these acts like UPMIFA, it goes way beyond that as well. And some other mistakes also that we've seen, organizations take whenever it comes to UPMIFA, again, performance chasing, which actually is prohibited as well. It requires institutions to invest based on long-term prudence. So selecting investments just because of how they might have performed recently actually fails the mandatory prudence factors. And also diversification. So I think, as a community, we are still having more products that are coming to market, more investment opportunities. But still, sometimes an organization will come to us and say, well, we're diversified. We've invested in this fund by this company, and this fund by another company, and this fund by another company. But when we look under the hood, all these investments are all in the same asset class. They may be all, for example, similar types of sized companies or within similar sectors or similar industries. And that's not diversification at all, right? It's like as if I say, well, I'm going to go and, buy a healthy grocery list for my family, and I go to 3 different grocery stores and I just buy the apples because they look the prettiest and they're the cheapest, right? I haven't really diversified when it comes to my basket in that case either. Now, when it comes to selecting investment managers, also there's guidance the organization should also take here. Again, UPMIFA allows fiduciaries, in this case, to delegate investment decisions to qualified professionals. But again, you have to make sure that you're asking the right questions. So some of these questions, and I have a questionnaire I'd be happy to share with anyone interested on due diligence. When you are talking to different organizations, what are the right questions to ask? But for example, ask about how these organizations or these portfolio managers or companies, how are they regulated, right? So are they registered with any governmental agency? Are they registered, for example, with the SEC? What is their experience? How many nonprofit clients like yours are they managing? What is their experience in managing restricted funds and developing spending policies? What is the investment philosophy? Of course, for us, making sure that a waqf is Sharia compliant, of course, is important because as Bashar was saying, waqf is a form of worship. So that is crucial to making sure that there is a strong Sharia compliance process in place, that it is documented, because as we know in the financial industry, if it's not written, it doesn't exist. So you have to make sure it's a written, documented Sharia compliance process. Is it audited? Is there an active Sharia advisory board? These are all important questions to be asking. Are they familiar with UPMIFA and these different tests, and how do they incorporate that whenever they develop a recommendation for you? What are benchmarks that they're using? How do they do risk assessment? Because while we talk a lot about return, risk often is one of the critical components that can reflect whether our endowment ends up being successful or not. Of course, fees are important as well. How are those fees designed? How are they constructed? Are there layering of fees? Are there hidden costs, or are there revenue sharing arrangements which might hinder that manager's fiduciary responsibility for you? Is there full fee transparency? And then, of course, like, how are they reporting to you, right? How are they giving you performance reports? How are they documenting things? How will you know if there's some material change that happens within their organization? And in today's day and age, always it's important to ask also, how are they safeguarding your data? And especially, with cybersecurity as well. So to wrap it up, just talking about record-keeping best practices. Of course, we have to have good record-keeping. It's fundamental. It's fundamental to growth because eventually you'll have donors, you'll have hopefully people of larger institutions that may be interested in making grants, and they're going to want to see what kind of records you have. So again, that kind of comprehensive documentation doesn't only support transparency, but it's also supporting accountability, and also allows you to respond if there ever are situations where there are regulatory inquiries. So you have to protect not only, again, your organization, but you have to protect it from the inside and from the outside. So making sure that you have these safeguards in place can inshallah ensure that it can be something that is sustainable for the long term. So alhamdulillah, again, just to wrap it up, managing nonprofits, as we all know, it's more than just a job. It becomes a form of amanah for us and an act of worship. And may Allah grant us all the wisdom, integrity, and barakah in our efforts. Assalamu alaikum.